Great. Well, welcome to the TPG Leadership Series. We're talking about revenue generation. We're about to get started here in 1 minute, and we're going to talk. We're looking at an assessment framework for how to tell if your CEO can actually generate revenue or not. And I just want to invite my co-host here, a man who hails from Australia and has had a true international career where he was a divisional head of HR for Procter & Gamble across the prestige care and fragrances business for Asia, which included China, so it was a massive portfolio. And then he was a group chief human resource officer, one of 3 for Maersk Shipping, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, and was responsible for over 100 countries. Great HR experience. And then he was the group chief human resource officer for First Abu Dhabi Bank. And now he is the vice president, people and culture for Plastic Bank, humanitarian business that helps the world recycle plastic. Pete, please welcome Mr. Peter Baker.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shane. It's always a pleasure to be here. We are Plastic Bank. We are empowering the regenerative economy. We've collected over 2 billion bottles of plastic and prevented it from going into the ocean. But the interesting part about our model is we sell that plastic, and our revenue in the last 3 years hasn't doubled, hasn't quadrupled, it hasn't tripled. It's gone up by more than 20 times in the last 3 years. So actually, I come to this topic with a lot of interest because actually growing revenue is something that we in Plastic Bank have been able to do extremely well over the last couple of years, but actually exponentially taking it to even the next level is really top of mind for us. So I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank Shane, as always, for inviting us in. It's great to have the opportunity to have the passion, the commitment, the energy, but frankly also the expertise of Shane to reflect upon and build our capability on some of these important topics. So as always, Shane, thank you so much for leading the charge across kind of building capability here in the region. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, to have you. Thanks again, Pete, for coming. And just to give you guys a little bit of a background as well, our company, the Phillips Group, has been founded since 1984. So we've been helping companies place CEOs and board members for 36 years. And so that's one of the reasons why we really have a big passion for this content, and have sat in, I think, for the whole company, we calculated it was about 240,000 interviews, which we have been a part of or have been leading. So with no further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our special guest, a man who has had accolades such as Revolutionary CFO of the Year. He started his career as a strategy consultant with Booz & Company. He then went on and has held many chairman, CEO, and CFO positions. For example, he was the CFO of Abraj, and he was also the CEO of IVF Faki, which completed one of the largest healthcare IPOs in the history of the region at 1.8 billion dirhams. And he is currently chairman of MAP Science, which maybe he can tell you a bit more about. He is a legend in the region. So please welcome Mr. Ziad Makazumi.
Thank you, Shane. Just a correction. If I was the CEO of Abraj, I'll probably be in prison now. It was Arab Tech.
Oh, sorry. Did I say that? But oh my goodness. I meant Arab Tech. Sorry about that. Sorry.
Well, they both
didn't want to make that mistake.
So I can see the alphabet. It's a bit confusing, but yes.
Sorry about that. Yes. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I think I need another coffee, but apologies. So definitely was not Abraj. And, Ziad is really a guy that some of the, giants among business bring in when specifically they want to increase revenue, or they're looking at very difficult business issues that no one else can really solve. And he's worked on some of the more exciting cases across the region. So it's really a real luck that we have him with us to talk about this topic. I don't know if I can get my slides up. And So what are some of the things that we look at when someone's making money? Before we started, Ziad, I think you made a really good point, is that, and which we're talking a little bit about the preamble here, is that sometimes even a company posts in the media that they have made record profits or that they're making record revenue, and in fact, they are not. And maybe can you give us an example or give us some insight into, for example, if a company like Emaar or Emirates NBD or one of these large companies posts in the newspaper that they're posting record net profit, how could that actually not be the case, and how should we interpret some of those statements?
Well, it's very important to differentiate between actual revenue from operations and revenue from sale of assets. And we've witnessed that historically in the case of Arabtech and some of the banks, where they sold some of their assets and they showed it as a direct profit to the bottom line, which is correct. But again, let's say in the case of Arabtech, the previous CEO, not this one, the one before, he sold lots of assets and showed a profit at the bottom line. And in return, he was rewarded with a big bonus to the detriment of the shareholders, who actually were losing money and never got a dividend. As you know, the history with Arabtech eventually closed down. So it's very important to, when you say a rainmaker, define what kind of rain, because as you know, you can have acid rain that ruins your crop and kills everything around and harms the environment. So rainmakers has to be good quality rainmakers, not just rainmaker in a sense, I've signed this deal. And we watch it from with the CEOs who probably took over the leadership of Arabtech or Drake and Skull or NMC in some cases before the restructuring that is happening, where they keep on generating revenue, but revenue is unhealthy or fictitious or not correct, or they sign contracts in the case of Arabtech for billions of dirhams with losses or zero margin or very low margin. So you have two kinds of rainmakers, and to me, a rainmaker is a CEO who can create value and not necessarily just the top line. And value in the case of emergencies or unusual circumstances that we're facing now requires a different kind of fighter. And we do mean a fighter because, we're in emergency, you're at war. In Arabtech in 2008, I used to run the company as a daily war room because, we're defending every aspect of our business and you have to do it. So a rainmaker, and usually we've witnessed in the last decade that boards or companies appoint salespeople because they're very good at generating revenue, but they're not necessarily good at generating value or running the business in that sense, and they fail because, again, historically, you look at the top line. No, you should look at the top line, bottom line, and all other aspects that add value to the continuity of the business.
Absolutely. And so the actual term rainmaker comes from Native American culture, which is someone who can generate rain from the sky using mysticism, using spirituality, or using magic. And so it's almost a magic ability to deliver revenue and sales when there's a drought or you're basically outperforming the market. So in this assessment, what we're looking at is a company that has a clear business case that their sales is down, their revenue is down, they need to generate sales, they need to generate business development, and we want a superhuman performance. We want a performance that's going to beat the market. And so what is the assessment that we should look at when we're doing that? And these are some of the key areas that we're going to look at in this framework. And the first one for all my assessments is always identity. So if we have a company where, say, for example, our sales is down by 50%, we need to come up with the ball. The first part I really want to start with is the CEO that we're hiring. Do they consider themselves a rainmaker? Do they consider themselves a salesperson? Do they consider themselves a wheeler dealer? And then these are the other elements that are really taken from many CEO interviews where you're identifying someone who's outperforming the market, i.e. they're in the top 1% of sales performance, and that their company is creating a significant delta over what the market average is. So I think in tandem to what Ziad is saying is that, hey, somebody says I posted 55% increase in revenue. Well, let's check the financial statements, let's check the notes, make sure that that's organic sales, or is that sale of an asset, an acquisition, etc.? And then the other thing you also want to be careful of is, in 2007, everybody had 40 or 50% or 100% increase in sales. So you want to also tie it to what those market performance is. So this is the framework, these 8 steps you walk someone through. And the first one is very simple. A lot of times your assessment ends because you ask the person and then they say, no, I'm not in sales. I don't do that. And the more senior a person is, the more comfortable they are telling you what they don't do or what they don't want to do. The last one.
Shane, why would you say that the assessment ends there? So I guess, I understand the topic of this is the rainmaker identity, the rainmaker CEO, but why do you think it's so critical that the CEO personally is willing to role model being a rainmaker, rather than some CEOs would say, my job is to orchestrate, set the strategy and enable others to do that work? So, what is it about that for you means it has to be right at the core of their identity?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's horses for courses. And if the business case is that we have to increase revenue, you 100% want a revenue generator as your CEO. So you could see, for example, we had a company in the FMCG space. I don't want to necessarily mention who it is, but they took their chief operating officer and they moved him into a CEO position. They had lost about 50% of their market share. Their revenues were were taking a nosedive. And they took a chief operating officer, they moved him into a CEO role. The person is a self-professed, not a revenue generator, and you're not going to be able to pull out of that nosedive. You really want somebody, because you can orchestrate sales, but great sales, if you go back to the framework here, we are talking about box number 5, your Capex and your Opex. So a CEO who's not a bona fide rainmaker, they're not going to sign off on a $10 million center or show center, or they're not going to upgrade the hard and fast infrastructure that you need to drive sales. In box number 2, in closing, they won't really understand what it needs. And I'll show you some examples of that. Learning and development from HR, and that it really needs to be signed off. The expenditures really need to be signed off by the leadership team. If the leadership team is not a rainmaker at heart, they're not going to spend an extra $5 million on the L&D program that's going to train you the pre-success behaviors that you need to drive the sales. So you're in a case where this is not your key business, your key business case might be product innovation, it might be operations. Then in that case, you don't really need it. But let's ask the guru here, Ziad. What do you think? Is this off or not? If your business case is we need to drive sales, should the assessment stop there, or should we have a tolerance?
Well, going back to respond to Peter's comment, when you get a big ship, the captain is the leader, and he delivers and he takes it from point A to point B. It doesn't mean that all the crew and all the engineers and the engine maintenance people and everybody else are not important, but he knows or she knows how to run them, to generate that revenue and take them safely to the other side. And safely these days is more important than generating the revenue. So all the aspects are very important. As I said, it's not just the top dollar that is important, but to me is top value that we can generate. I worked with a couple of clinics and small hospitals where their intent to generate more revenue or more traffic and more patients. And I said, nonsense, because we need to increase the value and sustainability of the bottom line, even if we have to shrink the balance sheet and reduce the top line. And I was right, and they survived and others didn't. So it doesn't mean we ignore everything else, because it is very important, but it is also it's important for the leader or CEO to be a rainmaker. But to me, a rainmaker is not just saying dollars, but a rainmaker can produce the best. He can squeeze the best out of everybody that works for him and out of the assets, to restructure them and restructure the operation to ensure that it runs, hopefully without him, but better with him. So it also has to be, there has to be a structure, an organization that runs without a person, because if anything happens to that person, and we've seen it now, we talked about this last time, that Corona has shown that succession, not just only at the top, succession was in every possible operation, even the storekeeper or the driver who's going to deliver this, and so on. So you need a person who can generate rain or value or goodwill or wellness all across the organization, not just the top line, in my view.
Yeah, and so I mean, agreed. The skill set for the CEO is wide, and you can't put more value on one skill over the other unless you're really dealing with a particular business case. And I think the two things you need to tie into your CEO assessments is, number one, your vision. Where do you need to go? What does the company need to do to be successful over the next 5 to 10 years? And what is the current business case and the business environment we're operating in? This last question, number 6. If you join us today, what are the 3 things you do to increase sales? I think this is really a telltale sign, because a normal CEO would answer the question by saying, well, I have to do a research, I have to look at your business, and I have to, I'd have to come back to you, and I would do my SWOT analysis or my pest analysis or whatever analysis you want to do. And for me, if the core case is that we need to generate money, that would definitely put me off a little bit, because you have to think about it is, what are we trying to do? We're trying to capture someone who can deliver a superhuman performance. This is an unusual type of behavior that we want to capture. So imagine, if I give you a very politically incorrect example, imagine I had a psychopath and I asked them, when you walked in the room today, let's say Peter's a psychopath. And I say, Peter, when you came in my office, what weapons do you see here that you could kill me with? And Peter might say, oh, well, I walked in, I grabbed the shoehorn off the corner, I could probably throw that in your throat. I can use this bookend to kill. And the psychopath will start identifying 5, 6 things that they're already thinking about that they could kill you with, because that's how their mind works. I want another very politically incorrect example. If you're dealing with someone who's a nymphomaniac, when they walk into a room, the thoughts and the way they perceive their environment is going to be, they're going to have much different thoughts than a regular person will. They're going to have thoughts of a very particular nature. And so it's the same when a revenue generator walks into a business. They are not trying to come up with ideas. They go to a restaurant, they're going to immediately say, oh, if I was owning this restaurant, I would do this, I would do that. I would change the front because you can immediately increase your sales by 30% if you did this. They go to the zoo, they're going to be telling their friends, you know what, I wouldn't put the lion exhibit at the front, I would put it at the back because people need to go through, and I would move this here. And so they immediately start doing what? You're moving the lion exhibit, that you're talking about Capex, you're talking about Opex, you're talking about restructuring. It's very natural. The ideas will just flow. And when you work with real money makers, real revenue generators, that's how it is. Everywhere they go, they start popping off ideas of what they would do, how to make money. And so this is a very simple question. And I find that if you really want to outperform the market on your top line, specifically, as he is saying, is it not necessarily, if you don't have a bottom line, your top line doesn't matter. But if this is what we're going for, the person should be able to just knock this question out of the park.
But Shane, I just want to add something. If you ask me that question, how would I increase my revenue? I would say I need to talk to my customers or customers in general and see what will make them say, yes, I want to buy a product, and to look backwards to be able to deliver it competitively. Because Correct. The market is changing so fast now. As you know, the last 2 years have shown us that malls are not the place to buy. So even if you have the best product, if I don't go to the mall, I'm not going to buy from you. So this is why we're all forced to develop and build our own technology infrastructure to be able to compete, because it's inevitable. So the first thing, again, even when they developed that, they had to understand what will make it accessible. Amazon went through the whole process, say, what is the return policy? They had to check the products. They had to make sure the people who deliver are safe and vaccinated. So, but it all starts, as you said, it has to be market-driven. And market-driven, not just, I want to sell more. No. How the hell can I sell more, and to whom? And what do I need to do so?
Right, and customer centricity is a section here in the framework.
Yes.
The other one, which is quite interesting, is closing ability, and how do you close your customer? And you'll find that a lot of CEOs who are generic in sense that hey, I'm a holding company CEO, they might not have the specific this specific data. And this is where a lot of people will drop the ball. So, how do you close your customer? What are the 3 most common objections to buying your service, and how do you overcome them? If the CEO can't answer that, I can guarantee you that your frontline salespeople can't answer it. And a lot of the salespeople in the market for every company and service, they're really not closing. They're really not closers. They're order takers. They really don't have the skill set. They really don't know, what are the 5, 4, 6 common objections and how to overcome them. And so I just give you, and this is one of the things where we're talking about infrastructure and institutionalizing process. So you might make the case to say, oh, well, that's not the CEO's job to come up with how to overcome an objection. No, but it is the CEO's job to institutionalize process that is going to allow the company to be successful over time. And so if you go to Xerox or you go to IBM, these are, kind of gold standard schools of sales. They will have institutionalized process and training so that even after 2-3 months, their frontline sales staff are able to overcome all the objections, walk the customer through the close, and put it out. So you want someone who's going to be a mastermind at the top to facilitate that kind of institutionalization. And so when the CEO says, oh, I don't really know, or that's not my job, then we can really make a clear assumption that their team is not going to be getting you're not going to have the training academy, you're not going to have the L&D support, you're not going to have the resources to overcome these. So I'll just give you a case example of a guy who sold more windows in Toronto, my hometown, than anyone else. And he was the CEO of the company. And of course, he had come up through sales. So maybe it was why it was a bit skewed on this side. But you could see the window, the new windows, they have a lot of different reasons why you'd want to buy them, the triple pane, more, whatever the reasons, that it reduces your heating bill, et cetera, et cetera. So the key objections here to buying windows is, you go, the wife, you're pitching to the wife. She says, I have to wait till my husband comes home. It's really expensive and I can't afford it. So what does this guy do is he creates a program for the sales team that you overcome these 3 objections before you even get in the house. So, you would ask the customer, are you selling the house or are you keeping it? The reason why I'm asking is, do you want some cheap windows to make the house look good so you can sell it? Or is this really a long-term investment and you want to buy some really high quality windows that are going to reduce your heating bill over the next 10 or 15 years? So, but the real kicker where he got them is he cut a deal with the banks, a bank that wanted to take more mortgages and wanted to take market share in the mortgage business. And he said, look, my guys are going to talk to homeowners anyway. We will sell your mortgages and you're going to take the price, because $30,000 is what it costs if you want to redo your whole house windows. You'll put the cost of my windows into the mortgage and we'll roll that over. So I'll reduce their monthly mortgage payment. And at the same time, I'll get my windows paid for. So the CEO structured finance, operations, service delivery, all together to overcome in the sales pitch. And now, if this guy who did not understand what the main objection to buying the product is, he would have never been able to set up the deal and the proof's in the pudding, because he was the only company in the market that would say, hey, I'll come here. Is it too expensive? I'll put your windows in for free. And he, of course, dominated. People would be like, hey, I'm going to reduce my mortgage payments and get free windows. It's a no-brainer. So I don't know if that fits with you, Ziad, but so I really like to see a CEO who understands what are the core objections and is using the full resources of the company to institutionalize process to overcome them. That's what we're looking for when we're asking.
This is exactly, Shane, we're talking about, they create value for the business, as in de-risk the business, secure long-term revenue, and overcome any objection for a customer to say, yes, I want it, basically. So that person understood exactly what would make the customer say yes, overcome their objection, and immediately created value, not just revenue immediately to the top line, because that process, that strategy would create value on and on and on, and not just one-off for 1 year, basically.
Great. And so if you guys like the content, it's based on this book, CEO Assessment Selection. which is a bit of a runaway success, because if you Google CEO assessment and selection, we just continually to rank up. I think this data here is now old. Harvard, the top 5-6 spots now are our book, and Harvard is in 6th or 7th in terms of delivering content on what do you need to look for when you're interviewing a CEO. It's also a great book if you want to become a CEO, because it provides a clear roadmap on the skills that you need. So the next part that I want to look at, so now we say, okay, the guy, the person, the lady, they're identified as a revenue generator. To Pete's point, I personally would abandon a CEO who doesn't see themselves as a revenue generator, because that would be a bit nerve-wracking for me. Although you do see it in crises like Nikhil, when they wanted to, they hired Sanjay Manchanda as the CEO, who was restructuring the business, really a debt specialist. They had huge debts to roll over. So sometimes you do want someone who's not necessarily a revenue generator. But so once we get that done, the identity is done, and we see that they are focused in this area, then I just want to understand, do they know their metrics? So anybody who doesn't know their metrics, it causes a major issue, because if you don't know what the size of your market is and what percentage, say I want to increase, say I have 10% and I want 12% of market share, and I don't understand what the value of 1% market share is, that's a big problem, because, do I need to acquire another company to get 1%? Or is it, I just need to hire 3 more salespeople and I can achieve it? So if they don't know the size of the market, this is a major issue. And I was just sitting with a group CEO last week, who was going ballistic about this point, is that and he wasn't even talking about his CEOs. He also blamed his CFO. He says both the business unit head, the CEO, the GM, and the CFO should all know what's the most profitable SKU, what's the fastest selling, what's the least selling but most profitable, what percentage market share you have. And for him, he was getting red under the collar just talking about it. I don't know, Ziada, you probably would have zero tolerance. CFO didn't know his answer.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't leave it that long. Shane, I wouldn't leave it that long to find out that they don't know. I mean, I would demand that from day one. And if they don't know how to do it, I'll show them how it should be done, or at least an approximation, and leave it up to them. I mean, they have to take accountability and lead on that. But it is basic information. As I told you last time, I mean, I could tell you I had a P&L and a balance sheet for each of my assets in the healthcare business. How much each doctor generates, what's the trade rate, what's the revenue rate, what's the margin, what the services, what the profile of the patients are, how often they contact them, So when they say we don't know, then they're not the right people to be running that part of the business. So that you either train, well, I always say you need to change them as in train them, or change them as in replace them, but they need to be changed.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised as well, because when you're starting out the interview, it's just, hey, guy says, oh, I sell laptops. Oh, what's the dollar value of laptop sales in the UAE? It's not, you're not challenging the guy, and he can't answer the question, and it's very sad. So,
well, if he's selling, Shane, if he's selling $1 billion, I wouldn't care, to be quite honest. But
if he's selling $1 billion, but I mean,
in laptops,
also,
yeah.
Pardon?
I'm just, it depends. Again, I mean, statistics are important to give you a background, but if he's well leading in the market, to be precisely what market share you have becomes not necessarily that relevant. But I see your point that he doesn't understand, or she doesn't understand their marketplace, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it's not what percentage exactly he has, but what's the size. So, my market in the Middle East is the retained executive search market is about $120 million US. So that if you want to have a business that is bigger than $5, $10, $15 million, you need to either get out of the region, or so what it breaks down to, what's your vision for your business, where do you want to go, what's your strategy, and what's the size of the pool. if you want to catch a great white shark, you can't start, fishing in the Red Sea. You got to go out to the where these guys are. And so just for me, it speaks to a lack of strategic skills. And then what are the other part is then just getting into more of these deeper success metrics. And what's your share of market? What's your share of wallet? The banks are horrible at this because we all have, I bet every single person on this call has a savings account with one bank, a credit card with another bank, and your trading account for your stocks with another bank, and they don't care. It's like the bankers don't even have never calculated or what. I don't know. I'm sure, Ziad, you don't have one bank that you deal with because of all these things. So, what's your share of wallet? What's your customer conversion points? This is this might be a bit more specific to a head of sales or a chief commercial officer. But if the person really does know how they're driving their funnel. So when I talk, for example, with the #1 salesperson in real estate for the Middle East, that CEO will walk you through how they drive a customer from the time that they see an ad for property to the time that they buy that property. Every single conversion point they go through, and the computer systems, the training, the amount of resources that he's focused on reducing or increasing his ability to convert at each point is massive. And so these are just some of the core things you would easily be able to pick up. The other thing is, knowing what your deal size is, or what's your average number of sales per salesperson, and what's their average sales point. So you can dramatically increase your revenue just by focusing on increasing your deal size by 10 or 15%, or adding a product to your product mix that is going to be a boost sales. So for example, Harley Davidson is phenomenally great at this. You buy your Harley and they say, we don't sell Harleys. If you talk to the CEO of Harley Davidson, he said, we don't sell Harleys, we sell Harley accessories. And so, the first thing you do is you change your muffler, you change your handlebars. So you buy the Harley, you go to the parts desk and you ramp up another $20,000, $30,000 in sales. So, what are you really selling? And where are you going to focus on here? The rest of the automotive industry, they're horrible at this, right? Because you buy your car, you're going to take that car out of the dealership, you're going to get your tinting done, you're going to get, there's 4 or 5 services that you get that the dealership could sell you, which they don't, which Harley does. So these are just some of the areas that I would like to look at on the metrics. So
again, Shane, just a point on that. Your reference to the banking industry, where your current deposit, debit card, credit card, mortgage, and car loan are handled differently. And going back to the point of cost of acquisition, well, if the customer is there, the cost of acquisition is substantially reduced. So you don't have to go out on cold calling and tell them, are you interested in a loan? Now, the way they've done it, in my view, they outsource it badly. I even get from my own bank calls from India, ask me if I want the credit card on the bank. Now that to me immediately, are you stupid? Immediately, we all had that basically. Again, because there is no coordination, and it's done at the decision making is done on a lower level, not on a strategic level where somebody questions whatever we're questioning now. And I think it has to be the CEO. The CEO is not aware of all these things. And when he gets the report, we couldn't sell credit cards. The answer is, why not put more salespeople? You put mediocre people selling who don't understand what you're doing, and your customers are already there. All you have to do is possibly invite them to a reception, or talk to them, or get somebody slightly smarter to explain to them the advantages of moving things around.
Yeah, absolutely. My friend, he's in Canada, and when you open their account, they automatically open a trading account for him. And he doesn't have he's totally financially literate. And Snoop Dogg started a marijuana farm. So this guy buys the Snoop Dogg stock, and it goes up from 50 cents to $72. And he makes thousands of dollars and sells it. And it's just because his bank opened the trading account for him, and he saw Snoop Dogg on YouTube, and he bought the stock, and he makes out like a bandit. But it just shows you like how much money did the bank make at the same time on these transactions, just because they made it easy for the customer. So you can definitely, and you know, when I'm working with CEOs who are really hardcore revenue generators, this is really what they'll do is they'll look at the existing business. They'll start to see what's, you know, as what Ziad's talking about is what's your client acquisition cost, what's your annual value of your customer, what's the wallet size of your customer in the segment, and where can we easily just extract value from those points. And that's what you want to look at. Here's another little example of the automotive industry. So, you know, what happens when you want to buy a new car? Often you get a new job. The first thing, at least on the male side, I don't know about the women, but a guy will definitely go get a new car as soon as he gets a new job. And, you know, what do? You review online, you ask your friends. The last thing that you do is you get an auto loan. So this CEO, this automotive, they just basically made a sheet of all the bank loan rates. And they basically, as soon as you download that, it goes, your mobile number goes to the head of sales for the dealership, and they call you, they help you secure your auto loan. And then they know, hey, you know what, you are about to buy a Toyota Land Cruiser, but you know, we're Nissan, and we know you just applied for your auto loan, so we're going to pull you over. We'll take care, we'll help you secure it. And guess what? Instead of a Land Cruiser, now you're getting a petrol. And so again, going back to, you know, does a CEO really need to know this? I think infinitely a company that has a CEO understands this cycle, and where the key thing is that do you understand the buying cycle? And how are you leveraging the buying cycle at the peak just before the purchase to your advantage to win a customer? And this is something that I find, you know, CEOs who really outperform the market do phenomenally well, and CEOs who are average performers have no clue about, or they really have never done. So just a couple questions I would ask here is, you know, what's your buying cycle? What's your customer journey? Have you ever mapped it out? A lot of them will say no right away. What Ziad was talking about here is your AVC, your annual value of your customer, your lifetime value of your customer. And
Shane, let me pause here, right? Let me dispute that statement. When you say a lot of them will say no right away if you ask about the buying cycle. In my experience, if you've got a senior interview, people would not ever admit that they don't know. They'll typically try and make it up or wing it, or you know, string some words together. So, you know, what is your advice to in terms of actually really pinpointing and making sure that the person really knows what they're talking about and they really have the mastery on things like this, versus someone who's just read a funky article on LinkedIn or Harvard Business Review and they're able to put some jargon together?
Right. So a lot of times when we're interviewing, we don't care what the person's saying. We really care how they're saying it. And so if I ask you, you know, what's the buying cycle? So if you ask Ziad, what's the buying cycle for someone who's getting IVF treatment? He will start to provide you an extremely detailed recount of what that person goes through and where they go and how the customer travels before they spend their money. Somebody who's making it up, there'll be pauses, they'll look up in the air, and they'll start to feel their way through the answer. And so that is, to me, I mean, just to clarify, like what Pete's saying is that I would take that as a no. And so, but traditionally, like what Pete is saying is that actually it's not technically saying no, but they're trying to come up with an answer. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you. That's great.
You would have mapped this, right, Ziad, if we asked you?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely correct. Yeah. And again, I mean, if you went through the process, the sector knowledge is important, but is not crucial in a sense. And when I moved from construction to healthcare, the definitions and the components were not as important. It's just the process and how you link them together. And as you said, I mean, I could tell you each couple why they said yes and why they said no, how long it took them. And when I took over the business, the average spend per client went up almost 80% in less than 2 years. Because again, we went in and understood what is it they want and why did not make a decision and how they make the decision. I mean, we talked about this last time when we were online. We analyzed every aspect of the decision-making process And we try to match it to every aspect of the value chain that we put together to make sure we maximize the return for them, at least that is fantastic, great. Of course, to them, it's a healthy child at the end. But to us, showing them value for money where they say it was worth it, and they don't question how much they spent.
Right.
It's a great way of framing it.
This last question, it's not a make or break, but I always find that somebody who's a hardcore revenue generator, they will have very deep client relationships. They will have chair level relationships and CEO level relationships that they're going to bring into the organization. Not always, but it's also a good litmus test where the person is saying, hey, you're selling water, somebody who could bring you Emirates Airlines and Etihad Airlines as customers, it's going to boost sales. So what are the whale accounts that the person can bring, or what is their strategy to bring in those whale accounts? There's an interesting question now in the box is what happens if you have sales dropping on one hand in a failing organizational structure and a limping HR department. And so, my answer, let's see what the other specialists here on the panel say, is that first, for me, you really want to understand, how are we going to win in the market? Where are we going to generate revenue? What's our vision and strategy on those pieces? And then I want to create my organizational structure around the business plan, around the business case, around the vision and strategy. And then I want to empower my HR to help fuel our success and our human capital on those focuses. So it all starts for me with the vision, strategy, and revenue, and then everything built around that. But I don't know if you guys want to take a stab at that question that was asked in the chat box.
Well, I mean, to me, again, strategy is not a process. It's a multiple dynamic process that are interlinked. So the HR strategy, technology strategy, marketing strategy, balance sheet strategy, financial restructuring, capital, they all have to be dynamically linked. So it's not, and as your reference to a company that failed, organization, it means they're trying to solve one problem at a time instead of looking at it dynamically as a whole, trying to sort everything else. And this is the role of the leadership, but not just the CEO. And this is where the CFO becomes a partner in the process and head of HR. I'll give you an example. One of the companies that I investigated the dealings or bad dealings of the previous management, when I did the analysis on the projects, of course, they didn't finish them on time. I found out that even in one emirate, not even across the UAE, there were 32 labor suppliers. And the labor suppliers, they were hired because somebody on the project said, oh, I will hire you either because they're friends with them or they get a kickback or whatever. And the labor rates, again, went from 9 dirhams to 42 dirhams per hour. This is based on their calculation. And the first question I asked, first of all, is the 9 correct or is the 42 correct? And what's included in it? Does it include all the loaded costs, for example? And no one could give me an answer. No one could give me an answer. And I said, well, if I were you, I would start getting rid of the outsourced labor on the projects that are finishing that are expensive. So if you go to Transguard, for example, they're providing at 42 dirhams an hour, do we really need them? Should we wind them down and close the contract, basically? Because, we know that, let's go with our core team and employ hours, because that cost, if it's 100 or 50, is hours anyway. We can't get rid of it unless we fire people. So let's reduce the overheads and the revenue. And this is the kind of analysis that we're talking about. So it's not, we need to concentrate on HR, you need to do that, but at the same time, you need to concentrate on finance and marketing and so on. And in some cases, and when I took over Arab Tech, not Abraj, I shrunk the balance sheet technically. I literally shrunk the balance sheet because it was healthier and fitter and can cope with the volume of business. So at some stage, we had almost 60,000 laborers, went down to just over 34,000. It's still a lot, but with that, we can make a profit. And during my tenure as running the group, I only showed one loss, 1 quarter of about 3 million, as compared to all the big losses that they hit later, the subsequent management took on, because that, there was an exceptional event in that quarter. So it's not one strategy, it's all the strategies, working with the HR people, working with the finance people, working with the marketing. Again, I used to have a war room every day. sitting down with procurement, with project managers every week, and so on. I used to go and visit the site, see, understand exactly what is happening. And not all of a sudden, oh, there are a bunch of 500 million dirhams of invoices that I hid in the drawer as a project manager because it doesn't bother me. Well, it does bother us. So these are the kind of things you need to do. So it's not one strategy. It's multi-dimensional strategy running at the same time, in my view.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a fantastic way of framing it. I mean, I still go back to the old framing of that the job of the CEO is to build the business and to build the organization. And that's why, you know, it's great that we're asking questions here direct around revenue, and it's absolutely critical. And the dimensionality that Ziad was speaking about is really key. And I think before I would appoint anyone to a senior position, I want to see evidence. How have you built the business, but also how have you built the organization in terms of building the capability of the people, putting in place the right talent, putting in place the right systems and processes that enable people to be their best. And by doing that, you're contributing far beyond the quarter where you've brought in the revenue, or you're actually setting the business up for long-term success.
So this next section, the Capex and Opex, this is just something that I noticed through my interviews and through my experience, is that when I'm dealing with someone who's really outperforming the market on their sales, they naturally have Capex projects. So, you know, I want to make a new showroom, or I want to put in a new MIS system, or I want to get a new technology system that's going to allow me to interact with the customer better. I'm going to have a new system that's going to allow the customer to familiarize themselves with the service or product better. I'm going to change the way we physically are structured as a business and gear it towards increasing sales, increasing share of wallet, increasing user experience, increasing customer experience. And all of these things cost money and require Capex that generally needs to be signed off at the board level. So this person will push for those. And because they're trailblazer, often their proposals will get rejected initially, especially if you have an old school board and they're going to say, oh no, you know, we're not going to be, you know, this new full digital online program, we're not ready to, you know, go for it yet. So this is just really from my experience, where you ask a guy, you know, if you could snap your fingers and have any Capex project done today, what would it be? So a natural revenue generator would have thought about it, would have been daydreaming about it, and would say, oh yeah, I would immediately put in 6 new warehouses in these fringe areas in Saudi and in Aba and Taif and stuff, rather than just focusing in Riyadh. You know, that's what I put in right away. Or somebody who's good, they're a good CEO, they're doing great, you know, they have good results. They're not necessarily daydreaming about how they're going to increase sales. They'll have to think about it. They won't have an answer on the tip of their tongue. So again,
Shane, can I just, I mean, definitely that is important, but there's also another way if you understand a business. I'll give you an example. When my old business, family business, acquired a big manufacturing facility in Hardenberg on the German borders between Holland and we were the first in fiberglass that we introduced to the Middle East and so on. Now it is the material of choice. When we looked at the business, when we said, why can't you push sales more? The answer was, well, we need to acquire more facilities and keep more stock so we can deliver faster. And when I looked at the numbers and I looked at the cycle of ordering, let me tell you how it works. You have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 salesmen go on ground. They go on the trips, come back 2 weeks later, prepare the reports, then submit it to the manager, who will go in and book it for the facility. Now that loses 6 weeks technically of decision process. And 6 weeks in production and in manufacturing is very expensive, especially when you want me to produce 6 weeks more of stock to meet your delay of sitting on your backside and not reporting. So what I did, I got everybody a laptop. In those days, we're talking about late 80s. We got a mobile chip in it that links to your phone. The mobile chip has to be linked to your phone in the car, which means you have to send me the reports while you're actually, and not say, you know, I'll send it tomorrow when I go to the hotel. No, I want it on Wednesday evening. So by Thursday, I want to know what all the potential orders are, so I can potentially start planning what next. Now that saved my cash cycle by about 8 weeks. And when we're talking about turnover of about 120 million, Now, when you talk about 8 weeks, that is 80 million. That is more than double your profits if you can get that cash in. So cash is important, revenue is important, but is cash in the bank, because we still have to pay the employees and the salaries and so on. So it does mean we did not expand our facilities and go into complementary products, because it's the same shipping. If the truck is going, I can add other product. For example, we created something called nesting. And nesting, Shane, is you take a big pipe and put a smaller pipe in it and a smaller pipe in it, because technically when you're shipping big pipes, you're shipping air, and that is one of the biggest expensive part of your cost of delivery. So you can see all our pipes, all our big trailers that are 40-foot trailers, all the pipes are nested in each other, and that saves a lot of money, because otherwise you needed more facilities and more trucks to take the 10 pipes instead of putting them inside each other, for example. But so it's this kind of thing that if you don't go in and observe and say, this doesn't make sense, and you depend on people giving you the answer and just looking at the data, you will not be able to make an informed, logical, financially safe decision in that sense. So I agree with you, facilities are important, but you should increase the value all the time from the existing facilities.
Absolutely. So we'll just fire through here. This is Peter's favorite, or at least it should be. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn on his behalf here, but this is the L&D and HR. And you find in the region, there's some leaders who say, you know, HR is garbage. It's full of crap, you know, and I'm going to give it the least amount of attention as possible. And when you find people who are dramatically outperforming the market on their sales, there's something that's very interesting that the CEOs, all the guys were, or ladies, guys and ladies, were exhibiting. And that is that they defined what are the exact behaviors that I need my sales team or my team to perform. Sometimes it's post-sales as well. Sometimes you'll buy a car because you know the post service is phenomenal with them. So it's not just the sales team, but all the departments, what are the behaviors they need? And then first of all, do I have the right policies and procedures to dictate what those behaviors are? Do I have the right learning and development programs to enforce those behaviors in the organization? Do I have the right incentives and rewards to drive those? And all three of those sit with HR. And so you start to ask, another really telltale sign of somebody who is a phenomenal revenue generator is that they create many, many other revenue generators around them. So how many money makers have you created? Another one here is really the 360-degree review is not an online survey that you send. You know, a guy who really, if I have someone reporting to me and I really want to develop them, I really want their performance to increase, I will not send them an online survey. I will sit there and do the 360 myself, and I will identify where is the gap. Okay, here's the skill set that you need. You don't have enough product knowledge to engage with a senior decision maker. This is the product knowledge you need. And then create the L&D program. So your 360-degree review and your L&D program should be linked together. And these are just some of the easy questions. Another simple question you asked.
This is such a super point. If I could just jump in here, Shane, and I think, you know, the red flag to me is when talking to people about the sales process and they talk about the sales process or the sales technique that they have learned throughout their career, or the process that works for them is X. For me, that's a red flag, because actually, if you're hiring someone to effectively lead sales for an entire institution, what you're looking to make sure is that they have an institution-wide sales process and not a personal kind of group of skills that they learned 15 years ago. Shane referenced before Xerox and IBM, and certainly I spent much of my career at Procter & Gamble. You know, we had an extremely I'm going to say aligned, consistent sales process that was consistent with our culture and consistent with our business strategy, and therefore it worked for us. And so, you know, all of our salespeople kind of sold in the same way, and that actually brings alive the brand consistently, but then ensures actually that we're geared up to serve customers in the most efficient and effective way. So what you're looking for is, you know, how has the person been able to to leverage the culture, the strategy of the organization to sell in a way that makes sense for the organization, not selling in a way that's consistent with their own personal preferences that they may have learned in a different organization 15 years ago. So be aware of that trap. And I think particularly here in the Middle East, where a lot of people come in with great experience from other companies, but we shouldn't just assume that what worked in XYZ company back in Singapore 10 years ago would work for us now here in the Middle East.
Absolutely. And I think an interesting question is, how many training days a year should your staff be getting? So as a CEO, you're working on a high level. So what are the metrics that you would kind of just take a quick litmus test? And, looking down, if you deal with some of the airlines, these people have upwards of 60, 90 training days a year when they start. Their first year, they have 3 months of training before you step on an airplane. And then you're looking at 18 plus training days a year to maintain your certifications and all that in order to be in the air. And then you have other companies on the other side where the guy says, look, it's burn and churn, either you have it or you don't. So we're going to hire 100 salespeople, and within 6 months, 50% of those will be gone. And, it's basically, you're just running this massive burn and churn machine. And it's like, well, you're always going to perform at market. You're not going to get that institutional memory of that P&G and IBM and a Xerox has. Although, this is, the way the region goes is it's more on the other side. It's more burn and churn. There's very few CEOs who can really see the value of HR, unfortunately. I don't know if Ziad has anything to.
Very true. Very true.
And this is another interesting question I like to ask the CEO when they step into a new role is, how did you change the incentive and reward program? And the second that you hear that, they just accepting, a lot of CEOs just take the legacy incentive program and they run with it. And that your incentive program should always be tied to your vision and strategy. You change your vision and strategy, you should be changing your incentive program, in my opinion. So that's another big red flag when you have a new CEO come in and they're not changing the reward incentive programs. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that.
Well, I mean, in all my companies, I had 2 targets in incentive program, reward and what I call loyalty. So I mean, suppose you give somebody $1,000 or 100 units or whatever it is, then I would say I'll give you 150, but instead of giving you the 1,500, but instead of giving you 1,000 up front, I'll give you 750 now and 250 over 3 years, because I'm giving you more, but you'll only get it if you stay with me and you keep on performing. So to them, going to make more money, and they are morally, legally, commercially obliged to stay longer and try harder, because they can see there is more in it for them if they stay. So to me, it's not just short-term performance, it's long-term loyalty and continuity, because I also want that knowledge and database that is in that person's head to go to others and they train them. I also, in some cases, added training. Mentioning that, I mean, as you know, in the healthcare sector, you need to do a minimum number of actual credited training. It's called advanced medical credits. So you need to go and do it. And I think we should try to implement that in organizations, but working with HR to see what makes sense, and not, again, no disrespect to the HR. I need an HR manager who understands the operation and serious enough, not just go on Google and say, look, Google does this training, we should do it because we can understand the psychology of people. Of course, it is important, but I also want something that is specific to me. For example, when we did in our clinics, I sit down and question everybody from the reception all the way to the doctors, what problems they had and why they thought they had them. It doesn't mean they have an answer. One of them was language. One of them was timing. One of them was gender. A woman feels more comfortable with a certain kind of woman to treat her. So again, it doesn't mean we changed anything or banned anything. We just reallocated the resources to make it better. And this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. So looks like I'm running out of time, unfortunately, but just quickly, the other areas I would look at branding. And a key question there is, what are the strategies you can use to move your brand position? Another one here, this is from P&G actually. How do you increase sales? And this is what I was working with Procter & Gamble guys. They're big on the distribution. And so the first thing that, I worked for the CEO who was ex P&G, and he's like, this is his main thing. So as soon as he takes over a business, he looks at that distribution channel, and it's an easy way to, not an easy way, but for him, it's where he would get an immediate delta within, 6 months, in a new role. You're a new CEO, you're coming in. Remember that you have to deliver results. So for him, he's like, a low-hanging fruit usually is if you can strike a good distribution deal, if you can do a co-packing deal. So for example, co-branding. So the guy, one of the biggest co-branding examples is the Locos Tacos, the Doritos tacos with Taco Bell. So Taco Bell, everybody, generally, the guys who are eating Doritos were also eating Taco Bell. You put them together, these guys sold 10 million tacos or 120 million tacos in 10 weeks. Just to give you an idea, it took 18 years for McDonald's to sell their first million hamburgers. So I don't have time to go into it too much, but distribution, branding are the other areas. And there's a couple just steps to walk through, a couple questions you want to ask yourself to see if your candidate is actually a rainmaker or not. If you like this, if you want more, obviously these are deep subjects, and as Ziad's pointing out, it's not like you can just grab one and say, oh, he's a revenue generator, so we basically want to he's a revenue generator, so we basically have our CEO that we want. No, but it's a huge group of skill sets which are covered here in the book. And you can also get a sample of some chapters if you want. You can download it from the website. And we also have a CEO certified course, which will be the first of its kind that we're offering in January, so if anyone's interested. I don't know if we have any other questions as we kind of close off the session here, but that was the end. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. I want to, big thanks for Ziad, and apologies again, Ziad. I don't know how I made that blunder about your bio. Obviously, it is Arab Tech, and apologies for that. And I just want to give a big thank you for being our special guest and providing those insights that you can only have after decades of experience of working in these companies and dealing with these complex issues. So it's a real, it's a huge value to hear your perspective. And so thanks again for joining us today. Yeah.
Thank you.
And a big thanks to Peter as well. I think you kind of showed your battle hardened stripes that you earned in the field of HR and the projects that you did. Peter's gone because we're past the hour already. We also have one of the greatest directors in the UAE, Abbas Ali, who is also the director of Bedazzled, the TV show that's on right now. It's on 7 p.m. at Fridays. He's here in the audience. And of course, me and Pete do the career tip time for the TV show. So it's always a pleasure to have him. And a lot of old friends I can see out here in the audience. So thanks again for everyone. Kareem, Montasser, Santiago, so many people there. Rami Bazi's out there as well. It's really nice to see everyone. Ashton D'Souza, a face I haven't seen in a while. So it's a real pleasure. So that's our show for today. And next week, we are talking about leadership and how to tell if your CEO is a great leader or not. There's a big difference between being a leader and being a manager. And so we really want to have, do you really want to have a leader in the role? How do you test for leadership? What are the traits that we look for? What makes a great leader, and what kind of assessment framework should we be using is what we'll be tackling next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Thanks again for everybody. It's been great seeing you. And we're going to wind down if I can figure out how to shut this down. So.